Good morning. My name is Stacy Watson. I am the Director of Economic and Industrial Development at the Georgia Ports Authority. It is a pleasure to join you virtually and visually. I apologize that you could not come and see the port firsthand, but I wanted to extend an invitation, before we even get started, for you to come down and talk with us and actually see the port at your first opportunity. It definitely is a sight to behold. Again, my name is Stacy Watson, and I've been with the Georgia Ports for about 28 years. I was an intern right out of college. I started my career here as an intern again in 1992, and had various management positions throughout my tenure at the port. Started in operations, container operations, ship operations, then went to marketing. And I've been doing economic development for about 20 years. And what I do on a daily basis as the economic development director at the port is I work with our partners, our statewide partners, with the Georgia Department of Economic Development. I work with Georgia Power, all of the utilities around the state, and each development authority. Georgia has 159 counties, and the majority of those counties have development authorities. So I work with business attraction teams around the state to attract new industry into the state of Georgia. And my niche would be any business that would have an import or an export component. So basically a project manager, a salesman, all on behalf of the state of Georgia. I will go ahead and get started with the presentation as far as who we are at the Georgia Ports Authority. Okay, when you hear the Georgia Ports, we are the port operating arm of the state of Georgia. We're an authority of the state. We're not a part of the state merit system. I'm not a state employee. I'm an employee of the authority. We do operate for a profit. We have a profit and loss statements just like any other private business. But our profits are then reinvested into our facilities, and we have a strong and aggressive growth program over the years. But a little bit about who we are and where we're located. If you ever hear of the Port of Savannah, that consists of two deep water terminals, okay? We've got the Garden City Terminal, which for the purposes of this presentation, that's what we're going to focus on. We derive about 90% of our revenue through the Garden City Terminal, and it's all 100% containerized. We also have in Savannah, Ocean Terminal. Ocean Terminal is a 200-acre multi-purpose facility. Okay, that facility can move containers, it can move break bulk freight, and break bulk is basically any container, any freight that's not containerized, and we move ro-ro freight through Ocean Terminal as well, both import and export. Ro-ro is roll on, roll off. Any cargo or any freight that has wheels on it, that has tracks that you can roll onto a ship and roll off, that's what ro-ro is. Okay, down in Brunswick, Georgia, we have three deep water facilities. We have the Colonel's Island Terminal, which is actually the number 2 or number 3, depending on how you look at it, roll on, roll off facility in the United States. We're set to do about 650,000 ro-ro units through Colonel's Island, and we have room to grow, room to expand there. We have the Mayor's Point facility, which is a smaller facility for mostly export of break bulk forest products. We have the East River Terminal that we lease out to a third party called Logistech, and Logistech will load vessels, bulk vessels, with wood chips or wood pellets, little pelletized wood chips that are then shipped to Europe, and where they're using kind of as coal, they burn it and use it as fuel to produce electricity in Europe. So interesting little facility that we have down in Brunswick, Georgia with the East River Terminal. And then you go up to Northwest Georgia. That is the Georgia Port's first and so far the only intermodal facility, an inland port, up in Chatsworth, Georgia. And it is basically a direct rail connection via CSX from the Garden City Terminal to the Appalachian Regional Port. And the purpose of this facility is to take cargo off the road. We're competing with trucks. So what we want to do is take as many trucks as we can off the road, especially those trucks that would be normally going through the city of Atlanta. We've got a lot of customers up in the Appalachian Regional Port area. The carpet industry is up there. The poultry industry is up there. And not far from the facility over in Chattanooga, you've got Volkswagen that does imports and exports of automobiles. We've got the capacity at the Appalachian Regional Port for about 50,000 containers in and out on an annual basis. And we're currently right now at around 30,000 containers on an annual basis. So very successful facility that we have there with a lot of room to improve the access to Georgia's port system without the need to be right on top of the port. Okay. This is the jewel in the crown. You know, we're going to concentrate on containers. This is the Garden City Terminal. It is actually the largest single container facility in the Western Hemisphere. We have one container berth, one facility that is 1,345 acres in total. We've got the longest contiguous dock in North America with 9,693 feet of contiguous docking space. 36 container cranes on the terminal. As a point of reference, when I started back in 1992, we had 6 container cranes in our facility. Now we've got 36, and we've got plans to grow the number of container cranes that we have at this facility to about 42 to 45 container cranes. 158 rubber tire gantries. Those are the big straddle cranes. They actually straddle those container stacks, and they're used to load and offload the trucks. 158 of those on the terminal as well. That allows us to load the number of RTGs that we have, allows us to load and offload trucks quickly and efficiently. We don't want trucks waiting on our equipment to load and offload those trucks, to load and offload the containers. So we make sure that we have an abundance of container handling support equipment on the facility to expedite our freight through the terminal. If you look at that, we've got both CSX and Norfolk Southern on the facility. So we've got both rail yards, both Class 1 rail yards with on-terminal intermodal capability. So if a container has to, say, go off the ship to the container yard, from the container yard to a rail car, no need for an off-terminal dray, no need for an off-terminal haul. It's all handled at the Georgia Ports Authority Garden City Terminal, one-stop shop. And the importance of that is, if you look at our competing ports, if you look at, say, California, there are 13 different container facilities scattered around the San Pedro Bay area. If you look at New York and New Jersey, there are 6 different major container terminals scattered around that city. In Savannah, Georgia, one-stop shop, one container facility. I want to talk a little bit about the exports that we have. The state of Georgia and the Georgia Ports Authority is very fortunate and very blessed to have an abundance of export capability, of export products, okay? And you can see the Port of Savannah container exports by country: 17% China, 5% Vietnam, 4% India. So lots of services, lots of ocean carrier services to container ports and areas all over the world. Exports comprise about 40% of our loaded container volume for calendar year 19. That is a huge, huge advantage that other ports don't have. Okay, right now, again, we're about 60% import, 40% export. If you remember back in 2008, when we went through the Great Recession, that number flipped for us. We were about 60% export, 40% import. If you think of an ocean carrier like you would a truck, you know, that ocean carrier, that ship wants freight going both ways for the head haul and the back haul, okay? So in Savannah, with our export commodities, with our export capability, those vessels are actually able to import freight, and most of our import freight comes in from China, containerized. You know, you go into Walmart, you go into Target, you go into Costco, you see something that says made in China. We do about 33% of our business with China. 9 times out of 10, it came through our port. But we also export poultry. We export kaolin clay. We export paper. Anything you can manufacture from a Georgia pine tree, we export it, which kind of goes into the next slide. This shows the actual commodities that we export. Okay, food is a big item right now. Even during the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, food and refrigerated freight, both import and export, have been a bright spot for us. Okay, and you can see wood pulp, paper, waste paper, automobiles, clay, some retail consumer goods. So you see we've got a good representation of a lot of different commodities across a lot of different sectors. What you see mostly are commodities going out, being manufactured into a finished good, and that finished good is then imported back into the United States. So a good mix of export freight, which is a definite advantage for utilization of the Georgia ports. Okay, this is our 19-year, 20-year calendar, 20-year calendar year history. You won't find a better growth curve at any other port or any other port in the United States, not even say the world. So very good growth, very steady growth. You see up until 2007, 2008. That was during the height or depths of the Great Recession. You know, we were down by 10%, and that is actually the time that our export numbers actually grew above our import numbers. Exports are commodities in Savannah. So if those export commodities are cheaper in other countries, you know, the market is going to produce or going to source that freight from other countries. But if the dollar value is weaker and it is more cost effective to source kaolin clay, poultry, forest products from the United States, that is where the market's going to turn. And you saw that happen in 2008, 2009. And by 2010, we were above our pre-recession levels. And again, it's good growth up until calendar year 19. How do we rank among other U.S. ports? You can see the top 10 ports here in the United States. Number 1 being Los Angeles and Long Beach. We group those two ports together because they are actually one gateway, the LA Long Beach Gateway. And they're doing about 16.9 million TEUs on an annual basis. And a TEU is a 20-foot equivalent unit. Containers generally come in 3 lengths, 20 feet, 40 feet, and 45 feet. So one 20-foot container is 1 TEU. One 40-foot container would be 2 TEUs. So we measure our throughput in the smallest unit of measure for an ocean-going container. So we're talking TEUs here. New York, New Jersey, almost 7,500 TEUs for calendar year 2019, and Savannah with about 4.6 million TEUs. Now, that compounded annual growth rate from calendar year 2004 to 2019, you can see LA Long Beach grew by 1.7% during that time period. New York, New Jersey, 3.5%, and Savannah grew by 7%, easily making us the fastest growing port over that 15-year time span. So growing port, the number of weekly vessel calls that we have. And this is important because it gives a shipper, an importer, or an exporter options. It's just like flying an aircraft. You know, if you're a passenger out of Atlanta versus Savannah, you know, to get from Savannah to Chicago, you're only going to have a few services. So you're going to pay more for that service. Or to fly from Savannah to Chicago versus, say, Atlanta, where you have many different airlines competing for your business. The same goes for freight, and the same kind of scenario exists in the shipping industry. So these numbers that you see on the East Coast, those are the number of weekly vessel calls that call on each one of these ports. And you can see New York, New Jersey, they've got 37 regularly scheduled weekly vessel calls. And we're second only to New York, New Jersey, when we've got 36 weekly vessel calls from ocean carriers and services all over the world. So again, options. On the import side, it's important to be first in, but on the export side, it's almost equally important to be that last port out before that vessel goes from Savannah, goes from your port to a foreign port. that allows that producer, that the shipper, to bring freight into your port, and it allows them more time to get it from origin to destination, if you get what I'm saying. So 36 weekly vessel calls. This is our U.S. East Coast weekly container services. This shows our trade lane breakdown, our trade lane market share. So you're seeing that for the trade lanes of Asia via the Panama Canal, on the U.S. East Coast, there are 11 weekly vessel calls, okay? Savannah has 8 of those vessel calls. And you can see Asia, India, Middle East via the Suez Canal. Of the 8 vessel calls on the U.S. East Coast on a weekly basis, Savannah has all 8. And you can go through the list and see what's Europe, what's Mediterranean, what's Australia, New Zealand, and what's Latin America. Asia has always been our sweet spot. You know, lots of folks always think that our biggest competition is, you know, Charleston or Jacksonville. And we do compete with Charleston and Jacksonville for, you know, import and export freight. But our biggest market share as far as trade lanes is Asia, is China, Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia. So we're competing more so directly for trade lane market share with the West Coast. We want freight to, say, from Shanghai, go through the Panama Canal and come to Savannah, versus a ship going from Shanghai to LA and Long Beach and freight rail from west to east. So we want more ship miles, and we want to utilize the Panama Canal more. And we are actually as far as volume, we are the most utilized by the Panama Canal than any other port in the United States. Currently, 2 on-dock rail facilities for both CSX and Norfolk Southern, and the business for CSX and Norfolk Southern is about 50-50. This is important on the export side. Export boxes, export freight is usually heavy, very heavy. There's a quick statistic that an export box usually weighs 3 times more than an import box, all right? So you're shipping out very dense material. Basically, dirt, trees, and chickens are going out. Kaolin clay, anything you can manufacture from a Georgia pine tree, and frozen poultry. Very dense material. On the inbound side, the containers are loaded, but it's very light material, very light freight. So the majority of our freight that's coming in for export is coming in via rail. So the good thing about the Georgia ports is you got both class 1s with direct access to our facility, separate intermodal yards, and I'll show you a little bit later in the presentation how we're looking to expand upon our rail service at the Georgia ports, okay? And our rail business right now is about 18% of our total business, of our total throughput, but in the future, we expect that business to go up to about 25% in total. Interstate access. Our port, we are a river port. We're about 25 nautical miles up the Savannah River, okay, which is a good thing. Our location along the Savannah River puts us very close to Interstate 16, very close to Interstate 95, and Georgia has some of the highest over-the-road weight allowances among all U.S. Southeast states, which means that you can load a container within the state of Georgia heavier than you can load it in, say, South Carolina or the state of Florida. And again, this is a good thing for the export markets, the export facilities, because they can load more into a container, thus utilizing fewer containers that they can load on those ships and lowering their transportation costs. And again, our location along the Savannah River, 25 nautical miles up the river, we're not competing with residential, we're not competing with commercial. We're actually in Garden City, Georgia, which is the industrial area of Chatham County. So it's almost as important the things that you don't see on our facility as the equipment that you do see. You don't see condos, you don't see shopping malls. Again, it's very industrial area that we're in. And, you know, if we were any closer to the ocean, you know, we would be competing with the tourism industry and ports. People love the economic impact, you know, folks love the jobs created, but they have a NIMBY effect. It's we love you, but not in my backyard. Okay. The Georgia Ports Authority, Garden City Terminal, we're not in anybody's backyard. We don't want the trucks intermingling with the privately owned vehicle traffic. And again, we work very closely with the Georgia Department of Transportation to make sure that we have efficient access into and out of our port system. Again, we call these our last mile projects. Again, if we do all the necessary improvements, the equipment, the IT infrastructure on the terminal, and if there's a backup or if there's a bottleneck outside the terminal gates, then what have we really accomplished? So this particular slide shows the importance of our relationship with Georgia DOT to make sure that those highways and those streets that connect to the Georgia Ports Authority are more than adequate for today, and they're more than adequate to support our growth beyond 10, 15, 20 years down the line. So very robust system on the road side as well as the rail side. Population growth. For a port, population equals cargo. Population growth, people have to have their things, they have to have their stuff. And each port is in competition with each other to make sure or to ensure that people's freight, their stuff moves through our port. Okay, so the Southeast is the fastest growing region in the United States. And you can see that Savannah, just because of geography, we're the most westerly port on the East Coast. If you look at a globe, we're due south of Columbus, Ohio, I believe. It's either Columbus or Philadelphia. That shows you how far east we are. So in logistics, distance equals dollars. We are the closest U.S. major port to Atlanta, and Atlanta is the population center of the Southeast. So the majority of our freight is to and from the Atlanta area. We're 4 hours from Atlanta. We're 4 hours from Charlotte. We are 4 hours from Orlando. So a lot of population can be served through utilization of Georgia's port system. Savannah Harbor expansion project. Okay, how deep is the river? We've been working with this project since I started at the Georgia Ports Authority. This is probably the most studied civil works project in the United States, but I'm happy to tell you that the project is over 50% complete. Right now, we are the shallowest river port in the world. The channel depth at low tide is 42 feet. We are dredging the inner harbor to 47 feet. The entrance channel is already at 49 feet. So we expect our 47-foot project to be completed December 2021 of January 2022. Again, very important for that export component. Like I told you before, an export box weighs 3 times as much as an import box. So the inbound side is not as crucial as far as our capability to work a loaded container ship, a loaded 15,000 TEU capacity ship. The inbound side, it can be stacked full of containers and still sit high in the water. But for that export side, for that export freight, which those export boxes weigh much more than those import boxes, it's going to weigh the ship down. So what we're seeing is a shift. We're seeing some of our export commodities kind of move out toward other ports so that those ships can kind of top off the export freight at other port facilities. We don't want that to happen. So we're deepening the river along with the U.S. Corps of Engineers down to 47 feet. And we're fortunate as well to have a 7 to 8 foot tidal range in the Savannah River. So twice a day, gosh, we've got over 50 feet of water in that river as well. So again, you see the importance of having adequate facilities on the land side, as well as having adequate capability, adequate depth on the water side as well. Capital investment. Again, as the Georgia Ports Authority, we create our own profits. We generate our own profits, and we fund our own projects. So capital investment over the past 10 years It's been about has been about $1 billion. Capital investment over the next 10 years will be about $3.2 billion. Again, GPA funds. A little bit about the way we're set up as a state authority. The governor is the boss. The governor appoints our board, and our board does what boards do. They set policy and they approve budgets. So our budget, our capital expenditure budget over the next 10 years, $3.2 billion. And what is that $3.2 billion going to buy us? It's going to give us additional capacity, okay? Obviously, with equipment, with ship-to-shore cranes, we're going from 36 to 42. I've even seen numbers that show 45 cranes out on the terminal. Rubber tire gantries, the RTGs, which you see on this vessel right here, they actually straddle the container stacks, going from 158 to 210, okay? The capacity at the Garden City Terminal today is about 5 to 5.5 million TEUs, okay? And we're doing 4.6 million TEUs. We're mandated by the state, by our board, to have about a 20% gap between our actual throughput and our capacity. So that if there's any type of spike in our business, you know, if something happens at another port, and cargo needs to be diverted to the Georgia ports, or if there's a strike on the West Coast, that we're able to handle that, that additional business without being negatively impactful on our operations. So again, we have the capacity to do about 5.5 million TEUs, and that 3.2 billion is actually going to give us the capacity at the Garden City Terminal of about 8.5 million TEUs. So we can almost double our existing throughput on that exact same facility, on that 1,345 acre facility. So lots of opportunity for growth, lots of capacity for the future. I mentioned to you earlier the that we have both CSX and Norfolk Southern with intermodal facilities on the terminal. So what we're basically doing is we're connecting those two facilities. Right now, the number 1, that is the Norfolk Southern facility. And number 5, that is the CSX facility. So we're connecting the two, we're building the track, we're expanding those intermodal facilities so that we will have the largest intermodal facility in North America. We'll be able to build 4 2-mile-long trains on that terminal. And that is to support import and export freight. And that is basically to get freight to and from the Midwest, going up into Chicago, over to St. Louis, over to Memphis. And this will be additional freight for us. This is freight that currently is moving across the West Coast, going, like I said, land bridge going from west to east. What we want to do and what we can do is have that freight move through the Panama Canal, hit Savannah, and then go west. Okay, even if we get about a 1% share of what's moving across currently on the West Coast, that will be a huge success for us. And it's just options for the ocean carrier, options for that shipper, just in case, again, something happens on the West Coast. Again, there's a strike, there's a labor shutdown, there's a natural disaster, that Savannah will be able to absorb that freight, and we're able to productively and efficiently service all these markets that we refer to as the GPA Mid-American Arc, okay? Well, that's the end of the presentation. And again, I would like to invite you all down to the Georgia Ports Authority. Come and see the vessels, see the container cranes in action. It's one thing to see a picture of it, but it's another thing to actually witness it. And moving forward over the next 10 years, we're developing a second container terminal called the Savannah Container Terminal, which is right underneath the Talmadge Bridge, right across the river from Ocean Terminal. And that facility will handle about 2.5 million TEUs. We're working with the Georgia Department of Transportation to raise the Talmadge Bridge. So at some point in time, there will be something different there. We're currently working the biggest ships that call on the East Coast today, which are 15,000 TEU capacity, but we're looking toward the future with the 20 and 22,000 TEU capacity vessels. And at that point, the river depth is not the issue. The issue then would be the air draft, the bridge. So again, we need to stay ahead of that curve, and we've got good executive staff. We've got good support from the state legislature. And there's an old saying that's out there that, what's good for the port is good for the state, and what's good for the state is good for the port. So again, thank you for your time. And I appreciate you having the patience to listen to me. Thanks a lot.